go ahead and get us started here just so that we can make sure that we make the best use of everyone's time and all of our guests today. I'm going to share my screen. And again, congratulations, Seattle Housing Levy has passed. Thank you so much to everyone who made efforts for the levy, who did phone banks and text banks, who put the yard sign out, who talked to a neighbor. Seattle Housing Levy has passed. And so we'll be looking for some funding, and we'll be looking for that for Black home ownership. And so very excited to have that happen. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and get us started because we have a very packed agenda. So let's begin with our land acknowledgement. We would like to open this convening by recognizing that we are on the unceded ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We cannot work to fulfill our mission and our vision of an anti-racist present if we don't first acknowledge, as well as recognize, the true history and cost of colonization. However, acknowledgement is only a first step. We urge you to engage in accountable relationships and informed actions. And so with that land acknowledgement, we're going to move forward. So just announcements. You all should have received your Outlook invitation for the BHI Policy Network Summit, and that is going to be on December 13th, 10 a.m. to noon. It will be virtual, so we will have different elected officials as well as community speakers, and we hope you'll save that date. Please let me know if you didn't receive the invitation. I'd be happy to send it back out. And then, of course, the Policy Digest is going to be a really big way for us to stay connected in 2024. It will have policy actions and other things for you to learn about. So please do be sure, if you haven't signed up, that you do, and please share that widely. And then send me updates and information. I want to know what's going on for you so that I can communicate that out to the broader network. And then let's just remind ourselves, just like last evening with the levy passing, we are an advocacy network as policy group, and there will be call to action as we move forward in that new year. So please be sure to get ready to answer that call. It's amazing to be in space together and to think through the policies, but the important part is really going to be the second half of that, which is getting those policies out in front, making sure that we're showing our support and demanding the change that we want to see. We have a super packed agenda today since it is our last meeting before we complete the framework and before we have the summit. We're going to hear from a plethora of folks. And so it's going to be a lot of information. I am going to be recording it, and then you could review it at your leisure to make sure that you're kind of, able to process it all. But today we are going to have a number of guests. We'll be hearing from Marcella Buser of FutureWise, Carrie Burchard Wattis from Seattle Public Utilities, Kathleen Hosfeld of Homestead Community Land Trust, Jesse Simpson of HDC, Clara Manahan and Liliana De Leon of the Office of King County Member Cole Wells, and Eliana Horn from Puget Sound Sage. If we have time towards the end of the meeting, we will have some open forums for, your announcements, your news. We may run out of time, so you might want to put that into the chat. And if possible, I'll throw up a kind of, this is what it's looking like for the Homeownership Policy Framework image for us at the end of the meeting, should we have enough time. But let's make sure that, we're a little ahead of the clock and trying to keep everything going. We want you to understand these items that are here. We're going to go at the speed of, making sure we can convey the information. So we have an agenda, but we are not determined and bound by an agenda. And so we will move forward trying to hear from these folks. And if it all works out, great, and we're able to hear everyone, excellent. And if we need to, just shave a little here and there, we'll do that as well. So once again, thank you all for being here today. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and super excited to actually see people. And let me make sure that Marcella is in the room. And Marcella, I'm going to go ahead. Hi, Donald. I'm going to go ahead and make you a co-host in case you had anything you wanted to share visually. But again, feel free to just move forward with what you have, whether you're going to give us a chat or you have something to show us. So without further ado, Marcella Buser of FutureWise going to talk about transit-oriented development.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Bambi. I'm really excited to be here. Happy to see so many familiar faces too. Yeah, I'm Marcella. I'm with FutureWise. I'm the state organizer. So my primary role is working on our statewide legislative campaign, working with volunteers, different organizations. And I would love to talk about transit-oriented development today with y'all and share some updates with where we're at on that. But I would just love either show of hands if your camera's on or like a react if you are familiar with transit-oriented development, or TOD as it's sometimes called. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs. So this is not going to be anything new for y'all. Great. Well, I'd first love to share some background. Folks are probably familiar with FutureWise, but we are a statewide nonprofit. We work to build a better Washington for folks, regardless of if you live in downtown Seattle or a rural place in Washington. And we do this mostly through good land use policies, meaning we want to make sure that housing and public transportation and protecting our parks and farms, all of that's working together. So last year with our statewide campaign, we had some pretty big successes that I'm sure y'all are familiar with, at least some of them. I think the biggest thing was middle housing. This was a bill that we were able to pass, and now in most cities across the state, you can build duplexes, sometimes even fourplexes or sixplexes. This is huge because in case you weren't aware, we have a massive housing crisis that we are facing in our state. We need almost 1 million homes to be built over the next 20 years. And unfortunately, we are facing a lot of laws, and, just different barriers to actually being able to build these homes. So passing middle housing means that where you could once only build a single family home, you could now house 2, 4, sometimes even 6 families. That's huge. We also helped pass a climate planning and the Growth Management Act bill. So this way, when cities are now making their plans for how they want to grow and how they want to look, they have to incorporate climate change, which oftentimes means that they are going to be focusing on having denser housing and allowing that within their cities. So that was a big part of our campaign last year. Our campaign was called For Our Future. However, the last piece of the puzzle that did not pass was transit-oriented development, or TOD. This left a really big gap for our communities, because that's great, we have more housing, but people are still not connected easily to where they work or go to school or play. I actually talked with a volunteer yesterday. He goes to Bellevue College. He lives in Everett and has to take the bus every day to and from school. It takes him 2 hours just to get to school. So that's 4 hours every single day where he is just sitting on the bus, not able to spend time with his friends, family, focus on schoolwork. And that's something that we want to change. And we can do that with transit-oriented development. So TOD, this is the concept of allowing more housing to be built near our largest transit centers. So things like link stations, or if you have frequent bus transit, being able to build not just a single family home, but smaller, sometimes medium, even larger apartment complexes, so we can house more folks and get them connected to that transit so they can spend less than 2 hours taking a bus to get to school or to get to work. So right now we are focusing on really the framework that we will use as a guide for this upcoming legislative session. TOD is a really complicated issue. There's a lot of things that go into this, specifically around how dense can the housing be, how far away from public transit, what type of public transit counts, and probably most importantly, how do we fit affordability into this puzzle? So at FutureWise, I would say that we are primarily focused on getting a bill that we could get passed that is both feasible politically for legislators to feel comfortable supporting it, but also feasible for developers to actually be able to build these apartments or these homes, but also something that's equitable. Net FutureWise, I'll say we've got a lot of history with the feasibility. We know the wonkiness of the politics. We know a lot about the land use bills and ordinances, but we are not experts on the affordability aspect. So as we are moving forward in this process, we want to make sure that we are hearing from the communities and organizations that are going to be directly affected by transit-oriented development and making sure that we're including that equitable path. So right now we are looking at a few different policies and organizations, and I'm going to drop something in the chat right here. This is a lot about what we call equitable TOD, but I actually wanted to open the floor to y'all right now. You can either throw things in the chat or I'll drop my email if you want to send me an email. But part of this process is making sure that we are hearing from all of y'all about how do you want to incorporate Black home ownership into transit-oriented development? What are some specific policies or aspects of TOD framework that you would like to see included? And I see, Ryan, you've got your hand up if there's something you'd like to share.
Hi, Marcella. Nice to see you. So I just wanted to kind of note or flag, and I'll note, I mean, you obviously know I've probably talked with other folks as well on your team about this, but I do just want to make sure that as the TOD bill is, or as the TOD proposal is being developed, that consideration for home ownership as a part of TOD is included. Oftentimes, as you know, you've heard me say and others, you know, and I've made this point as well, oftentimes TOD is like, we ends up seeing, oh, it has to be 100 units. And if it's anything less than 100 units, it doesn't count. Or, oh, only TOD that serves 60% or below only count as TOD. And that's not true. It's important that we make sure that we include home ownership as a component of that. You already know that because you've heard me say that. Alex and all those teams as well have heard me say that too. So I just want to make sure that as we're putting this thing together, that home ownership is considered to be a critical piece of it.
Yeah, I've got a follow-up question for you. Like what would that specific policy look like in your ideal TOD bill? Because this is exactly the kind of thing that we want to make sure that we are hearing about and incorporating in our framework.
I think at least part of it is, one is, I mean, having folks who understand home ownership at the table when developing it. I think that would be a key thing in being a part of it. I think another piece of it is, you know, a lot of it is going to be in the details. It's going to be in, oh, you know, how do you define, you know, it's defining the AMI levels if we're talking about affordability, or it's going to be defining the unit count or unit types when we're talking about, you know, what types of units are included in that. You know, and oftentimes, like one of the things that we see, for example, like just as an example, this last budget cycle, at the beginning of the budget year this year, they ended up including a TOD grant proposal into the state capital budget, which was awesome, and funding TOD projects, fantastic. But anything less than 100 units didn't count as TOD, despite multiple people are pointing that out as that's not actually workable for home ownership, especially when you take into account that the land that home ownership was able to access, they expected across the entire project in Seattle 100 total units that covered like 10 or 15 different sites. So, I mean, that's a major kind of concern. Oftentimes home ownership gets the little slivers of land that rental can't figure out what to do with. So it's important to kind of keep in mind that home ownership doesn't always, like, setting some sort of bar like that doesn't really work. I think the biggest thing, honestly, is having somebody who understands home ownership, and particularly affordable home ownership, at the table that can catch these kind of things.
Yeah, I think that you are getting at some crucial aspects of TOD.
I don't know. Bryce has heard me yell about this at him already too. So
I was going to say, yeah, I'm excited to keep having this conversation with you. And if there are like specific aspects too that you like think of and you're like, oh shoot, like I forgot to mention this, I'm dropping my email in the chat right now. Would love to hear more from you. But I see there's a couple more hands that are up. Cliff, is there something else that you wanted to add?
Oh, sorry. Did you call on me?
Yes.
Excellent. Sorry. For a second, you cut out there. Yeah, so actually, Ryan brought up a lot of the points that I was going to bring up. So I just will kind of key in on two specific things. That one, any TOD bill that like meaningfully incorporates home ownership has to have a more flexible like AMI level, like from 80 to 100% AMI, and particularly, oh, sorry. And the unit count's definitely something as well. But one thing that comes to mind too is defining the type of transit corridors that count for those TOD density bonuses. Because one thing that I really like about the middle housing bill is it effectively is a really amazing tool in desegregating our neighborhoods and our communities. Because if you look at right now the pattern of land use for like affordable housing, for denser housing, people are stuck on arterials, especially near where I live, are stuck on arterials that have more air pollution, that are dangerous for kids when it comes to being able to commute. And I teach part-time at Bellevue College, so when you mention that one volunteer, I've actually heard that similar story. So if you look at a lot of frequent bus routes that go through a lot of working class, particularly a lot of BIPOC neighborhoods, that they're not like the kind of traditional high frequency or traditionally labeled high frequency bus routes, or at least they're labeled like that after the fact. So, yeah, I think in addition to everything Ryan said, which is spot on, that we should also have a closer examination of which, like, essentially what type of transit will count. And also, of course, making the AMI flexible so we can actually include those home ownership options instead of being just hampered to this very, like, renter, well, I don't want to say renter centric, but a rental centric view of like affordable housing, and really like catapult people to affordable home ownership.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's a great point about the type of transit too. Sweet. Thanks for sharing, Cliff. Okay. John, I see your hands up if you have something to share.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of things I'd suggest. One is in terms of trying to promote Black home ownership or home ownership in the buy. I think what we've also got to look at is not only the policy stuff. We've got to somehow try to create or find additional financing tools to help those families buy housing, especially at a time when either interest rates are as high as they are and or the down payment level is high. And so we've been talking a bit internally with our team about, are there some ways to leverage property tax service fees to create a home ownership or housing fund? It's unclear just yet, frankly, whether we could make that work, but we've been talking a bit to Dow's team about that. The other couple of things I would say is I think part of the problem is how we balance level of density. On the one hand, we shouldn't, like Cliff suggested, part of it is looking at how you increase density in neighborhoods that are off sometimes the main arterial. Part of it is also, I think we need to consider, how is transit going to need to change over the next 5 to 10 years coming out of the pandemic, and how workforce deployment is changing? But it's also that we need to take also sort of a page from Vancouver, BC. And I speak from some personal slight anguish here. I live in the Roosevelt district, literally 150 feet away from the Roosevelt Light Rail Station. When we were first approached by Sound Transit for the right-of-way to our house, I said, so what are you doing about housing? And they said, housing's not our thing. And while they ended up on that old QFC lot building a 7-story building that Mercy and Bellwether put together, it's a great building, don't get me wrong. We missed a once in a generation, if not more, opportunity to go high enough to build enough density to both feed transit and to create new home ownership opportunities for people at various income levels. And we should keep our eye on that ball as well, that as we build out transportation in all its forms, are we optimizing the space to get the biggest bang for the buck?
Yeah, I think that's really well put, John. Thanks for sharing. Okay, I don't want to go over my time because I know we've got y'all have a really tight schedule, but I know Kathleen, I saw that your hand was up and then it went down. Do you have anything you want to share? Nope.
No, I endorse everything that Ryan brought to the table regarding having our voices, the voices of developers of homeownership at the table. I've also, I guess I will make one comment that some of the RFPs that have gone out for TOD sites that propose certain objectives for the sites exclude homeownership from those objectives. We could be partnering with larger developers on master planning sites, doing condominium homes on those sites. And that is a really big missed opportunity to integrate homeownership into those projects. So I would love that to be a criteria in the RFPs.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, Cliff, I don't know if I have time to get to your question, but feel free to send me an email.
Marcella, Marcella, you're good. Yeah, you have
good?
You have like great. 8 more minutes. You're all good.
Oh, great. We're killing it, y'all. Go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah. So Kathleen, my apologies if I if you already covered this, but I 5,000% agree with Kathleen. In fact, I'll kind of go a step further, that I think we shouldn't really use euphemisms in terms of calling out to home ownership, but and like make it very explicit in the RFPs and make it very explicit in the legislation that home ownership is an affordable housing option. And in fact, kind of when Assessor Wilson was talking, it made me actually remember when I was working on the Mass Transit Now campaign, and one of the big things that was one of the promises from the Sound Transit 3 was that the what was it that the excess land, or 80% of the excess land, would go to affordable housing, or at least affordable housers who have the right of first refusal. I don't know how that got implemented. I was not at the policy making tables at that point, but I would think in any TOD bill that for affordable housing around those areas, we should explicitly, like Kathleen said, call out affordable home ownership in all those RFPs, and also make it clear that essentially make it clear that that development should be prioritized for building equitable home ownership options, as well as equitable affordable rental options, and just really say it plain.
Yeah, this is all great. This is exactly the kind of content that we want to be hearing when we're developing this framework. So I put my email in the chat. I'll just drop it again. But if this is something that you have thoughts that you want to share on, if this is something that you're passionate about, please reach out to me. This upcoming session, there is a potential for there to be multiple transit-oriented development bills that are going to be released. So having a framework that all of us can get behind, that we are really excited about, is going to help us navigate how do we actually pass TOD in a way that is feasible, equitable, affordable, and builds the community that we are excited to be building. Nick, I saw your hand just went up. Go ahead, share.
Just wanted a couple of caveats, and certainly you and many folks here and Bryson particularly have heard some of my concerns about particularly the fact that the proposal last year was developed without any affordability or racial equity components whatsoever. And I'm glad that that's finally being addressed a year later. I think it would have been great if that had been incorporated organically into the initial proposals. And so I'm encouraged by this conversation finally happening, and hope that it happens during session, because I think that there was a lot of unneeded divisiveness, some of it spurred by myself, around the affordability and inclusiveness components of the proposal. So thank you for reaching out to try to do that. I hope that your partners in the for-profit development community and Amazon and the realtors share that goal, because that has not been demonstrated to date in the, I don't know, couple dozen meetings that I've been on this topic. So I want to take you at face value, and I appreciate the work that FutureWise does. But I look forward to seeing something that demonstrates that these are core values.
Yeah.
Not to be the fly in the ointment or the spanner in the works, but the proof is in the words.
No, I mean, I think you're right. Like, this is something that we need to be prioritizing for TOD, if it is something that we both want to get passed, but something that's actually beneficial for our communities. So I'm very excited about this moving forward. I think TOD might be one of the biggest issues for this upcoming session, but I'm confident in our ability to navigate it and get something around equity and affordability that we're all excited about.
And Marcella, I'm just going to a follow-up question just in terms of process. So you're explaining that there are many different potential bills that will be coming up from, different champions, and that it seems the role that you want to take in this next year is to kind of create that philosophical framework and then be able to use that to look at the bills and decide where your support is and be able to strengthen the bills. Do you know if the bills that you're aware of, there are processes of stakeholder engagement with champions for their bills, or whether or not there has been a push towards community engagement? I think often transit-oriented development silos itself, acts like it's not connected to people's lives except for a very specific story that doesn't actually reflect the reality. And we also don't see transit-oriented development being very self-conscious, going back into communities after something has been developed, understanding why something didn't work, why something could work, and receiving input from those impacted communities who can tell you very clearly why it did or did not work. So, as you're moving forward, if there are opportunities for people to enter into conversation, stakeholder engagement, community input, please send them our way, because we do think it's about time, right? Like, we're talking about the Black Home Initiative. We can throw 70 reports at you that talk about the disparities in this state. And if we're going to land up with more TOD bills that are going to pretend that everybody looks the same, acts the same, needs the same size of house, and has the same job, this is not a world in which we're talking about that scenario of a white collar worker with a studio apartment who makes X amount of dollars and needs the particular level of flexibility to get around. So if we really do want to create an inclusive and equitable process, then we need to not only go back and say what has happened thus far and what can we learn from it, but also be able to think as we move forward.
I absolutely agree. I love everything you just said, Bambi. Yeah, I think we are looking at now about how we can build a process that is equitable from beginning to end and make sure that we are hearing from communities. We are deciding on what that process will look like. Ideally, this is something that even the state would get involved in terms of funding and making sure that we are spending enough time hearing from all these communities. But yeah, as I get more information about that, I am very excited to share that with you, Bambi.
You bet. And I know we're all kind of on the cusp of new changes with the Covenant Homeownership Act and where we are in the idea of using, affirmative marketing as we begin to do things, what we're talking about when we talk about community preference. But if we're really going to talk equity and we're going to talk land, if those conversations aren't happening, then we're really just being performative about that word rather than embedding it in something that makes sense for people in our communities. So excited to see that you're thinking framework first. I think often we're reactive and we hope to get the scraps that we're going to get. And I think we're beyond the scraps time. I think we're organizing to make sure that what we're seeing is that cohesive framework. So we're excited to see FutureWise stepping back and just saying, what can we learn? Where do we go from here? And looking for input from this group is amazing. So again, I will remind everyone on the call, we are an advocacy group. We are there to create some change. So please do share your experiences and share your voices. Reach out to Marcella. And I will keep you connected as we hear new things that are coming up. So we're excited for the new session. It is going to be a shorter session. And it may not be that we're going to find that Cinderella fit of the shoe for a TOD bill, but knowing the pros and cons are going to be really important. So we're excited to have you working within the effort, Marcella, and helping us to parse it all out.
Great. Yeah, and thanks so much for having me, Bambi. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone.
All right. Well, if the day continues like this, we may actually be on schedule. But we'll see. So next we are planning to hear from Carrie Bertrand Juarez. So this is a deputy director from the project delivery and engineering group at Seattle Public Utilities. Before we hear from Carrie, who I believe may be in the room or moving towards being in the room here, I'm going to ask Jesse Simpson to just give us a quick contextualization. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of things in this meeting you're going to hear about, and so we will try to prime it a little bit, just to give us a little bit of an idea about the Seattle utility fee waiver.
Yeah, doesn't look like Carrie's joined yet, so I'll just speak off the cuff and
hey,
hi.
I just joined.
Great. I'll just tee you up and then swap it over.
Perfect.
So in the Black Homeownership Policy Framework, we've added as a draft proposal for you to approve and consider here utility fee waivers for affordable housing, encompassing the broad spectrum of affordable housing. One of the big issues that we're seeing in the utility fee waivers for this next year can be encompassed within a ongoing proposal by SPU to change basically how new developments that need to put in water mains get charged. And because of the House Bill, I think 1326 last year, municipalities are given the ability to waive those fees for affordable housing, affordable home ownership as well. And really, I view this as a key way in which we are not just having the Office of Housing take their check down the hall and be more efficient with our use of scarce affordable housing dollars. I'll turn it over to Carrie now to talk through what SPU is considering.
Yeah. I don't use Zoom very much, and so I'm not sure if I have the ability to share my screen, to share some slides.
You do, yeah. You've been made co-host.
Tell me how to do that.
Yep, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a green kind of share screen.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's very easy. So let me pull some things up here. Okay. I am not going to go through the full presentation. I'm just going to hit on some key slides that I think will be interesting. I'm also not at my desk, so I'm a little bit not fully functional here, but we're going to give this a shot.
And we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. And I'm going to leave it in this mode if that's okay, just because it's kind of easier for me to navigate around. So yeah, so what Jesse's talking about is something called system development charges. And this is a charge that we have that we have right now, but it's very low. It's like $1,900 per equivalent residential unit, which is basically a single family home. And then we don't have system development charges for drainage, wastewater, or solid waste right now. But state law gives us the ability to charge those. And so we have had such an issue with projects that have been required to install infrastructure in order to connect to the system, and the costs that developers are bearing for that we are considering a proposal where we increase the system development charges, keep that money in a fund that we then use to cost share on our infrastructure requirements. So the goal of this program is to make it more affordable for projects that need to install infrastructure in order to connect to the system. So this graphic here just shows an example sometimes of what a developer might have to do. Let's see. See, I talked about that a little bit. So the state dictates how system development charges are calculated. And so we don't have a lot of flexibility in what the SDC is. We just have the ability to either have them or not have them. And so, like I said, we're thinking about having them and then using that money to cost share. So, but what Jesse was talking about is there's a new state law passed last year that says if we have those charges, if we have SDCs, we can waive them for projects that are publicly funded affordable housing projects. So that is a new development. We're glad to see that come into play. It gives us some flexibility. And so we'll be thinking about how to incorporate that as we put this policy into effect. And I do want to say that this policy is not a done deal. It is something that still needs additional stakeholder input. We have some stakeholder input, but we need to do more. And then this would have to be approved by council, for example, and we haven't started that process yet. So this is not a slam dunk. It's just something that we're thinking about. So I am going to stop sharing and answer any questions that you might have, or Jesse, if there's anything in particular that you want me to focus on in this discussion to talk a little bit more about.
I guess just talking a little bit about the impetus for SDCs in terms of what the current arrangement around when you actually need to replace a water main, and a little bit of context on how expensive that can be.
Yeah, and I see a great question in the chat too that probably somebody else might be better equipped to answer that. But yes, I'll talk a little bit about, these infrastructure requirements that I referred to. So sometimes when a project wants to connect to the system, to the water system, sometimes there's not a main for them to connect to, because Seattle does not have a fully gridded water distribution system. And what I mean by gridded is basically a line in a water main in every street. That's the ideal situation, a gridded system. Seattle's system is not fully gridded. And so sometimes a developer says, hey, I need to tie to the water line in the street. Well, there's not a water line in the street. And so in those cases, we require them to build it, right? As you can imagine, that is usually a pretty big investment. It can be anywhere from $300,000 to $1 million, and the developer or more, depending on what it is, right? And the developer is responsible for paying that. So as you can imagine, that is cost prohibitive for some projects. Some projects don't pencil out anymore when you add that cost, right? And we were getting a lot of feedback that we were killing projects, right? And in an environment where we need more housing of all types, we don't want to be killing projects, right? And so that's why we're looking at this proposal to hopefully be able to cost share in those projects so that we are no longer, killing projects with our requirements. That's the basic impetus for the proposal. Now, all along, we've been thinking about, okay, so what this would do is it would relieve some projects of a big financial requirement, but it's going to burden all projects a little bit, right? And so there are some projects that we don't want to burden anymore at all, right? Some projects, can afford maybe a little bit of a higher fee, but some projects can't, right? And those are the projects that we would, the projects we think in those terms is the affordable projects, right? That are government funded, fully affordable. So we're not talking about projects that include some MHA. We're talking about fully affordable projects. Those are the ones that we don't want to burden anymore at all. And so that's why we're looking at, even though this program would increase fees a little bit for all developments, we're hoping to waive that for affordable housing projects. Yeah. Now, the state law the state law does say that money has to come from somewhere else. So if we do waive these fees for affordable housing projects, it can't be a utility expense. So the city would have to find some other way to fund that. So we're still kind of in that situation, but yeah. And we've done several stakeholder outreach meetings on this, and what I always offer is to reach out to me directly if you have questions about a specific project. Reach out to me directly. It's sometimes easier to understand it when you're talking through an actual situation, and then we could talk about how this proposal would or wouldn't affect a specific project. Is there anything from the chat, Jesse or Bambi, that you'd like me to specifically address? Some of them are questions that are more for people who are familiar with the law, and I'm probably not the best person to answer that question.
Yeah, there's some, I'm guessing Kathleen and Cliff are going to also speak to this, but some comments around ensuring that whatever legislation is moved forward for SDCs is using the recently cleaned up affordable housing definition that includes affordable homeownership, and some clarifications from Cliff just to make sure that enabling legislation 1326 allows for homeownership. Yeah. 80%.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. And if we get to the point of drafting legislation, there will be plenty of opportunities to comment on the actual legislation as well. But yeah, we'll make sure we get that right.
And Cliff or Kathleen, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I did. So first of all, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm not a utilities expert, so that was definitely great education, and I look forward to looking more into the issue. So one idea comes to mind, and also one thing I want to highlight is that I'm glad we're having this conversation because it sounds like this is definitely something that like affordable housing developers and our circle should be intimately involved in, because these are the kind of technical potholes, so to speak, that like keep projects from penciling out and thus leading to less affordable homes. That being said, one thing I'm wondering, to cut through some of the red tape, has it been considered like to have an automatic opt-in system? Because from my understanding of what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the city would have to get the money from somewhere. So the idea would be to increase those utility fees in order to be able to exempt basically put that increased revenue into a pot in order to exempt affordable housing projects. And therefore, what I'm thinking is, instead of like having to have people apply and go through that process and spend more money on the back end, on the front end, could the city maybe explore something like an opt-in, where like when folks are putting in the initial paperwork to start the project, it's identified as affordable housing per cleaned up definition, which I'm in full agreement with Kathleen on. We should definitely use that better definition, and thus, we don't even have to go through the rigmarole of having to spend money to determine if we would qualify for the waiver, or rather, like affordable housers in general. So just an automatic opt-in system. Like, what would you think about that?
So what would they be opting into?
This waiver. So someone wants to build an affordable housing development, and instead of having to go through the rigmarole of applying and thus spending more resources, instead the city flags that as affordable housing and automatically opts them in for this waiver.
Oh yeah, if it's a publicly funded project that meets the definition of affordable housing in the legislation, we would automatically not charge the SD. We would automatically waive the SDC. Yeah.
Cool. And in the current plans, like, what does that mechanism look like? Or maybe I'm getting too granular about it. Like, just when the permits are in and the applications, and it's flagged, and it's like, okay, we're going to automatically exempt it, or is there like a process beyond that?
Yeah, I think I see what you're asking. So right now we use Excella. You probably are familiar with the permitting system that SDCI. Yeah. So right now there is a flag in Excella for affordable projects, and we look at that because we do expedite those right now. So we're not able to waive fees right now for affordable projects, but we are able to expedite them through our process, and we do that for fully affordable projects. So we already are being there's already a signifier. So projects originate in SDCI, and then they come over to SPU through Excella. And when that happens, there's a signifier on the project that identifies it as fully affordable. So we already are seeing that. And when we see that, we expedite it. So it gets a faster timeline through our process.
Cool. And how long? Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, just in the interest of time, Cliff, we're going to go ahead and grab Kathleen's question here and then move forward.
Thanks so much.
Cliff, if you want to, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you for these changes. So far in my career at Homestead, we've too often been faced with paying for not just our own infrastructure, but for future infrastructure needs. Those costs under the banner of growth pays for growth. It's been affordable housing developments that have paid for the future growth of oftentimes for-profit developers. So this system sounds like it will address that, and perhaps even help restore some balance in that regard, in terms of affordable projects being exempted from some of the investments that need to be made. So I just, the devil's in the details, of course, and we'd love to see the numbers, but just this is going in a really good direction, and I want to just say thank you.
Okay, thank you for that comment. I'm also seeing the comment from Jacinda that says that there's an MRSC planning determination that says that we don't have to backfill it from another source. That's really interesting. I will look that up. I will certainly look that up. Thank you for pointing that out.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Carrie. And I'm really happy, Jacinda, that you were able to put that in the chat. You never know what's going to happen when you come in to present in this room, but you always come away with something. So thank you so much for that. We're going to go ahead and move forward next with Kathleen Hosfeld. So we're going to talk about a couple of items that are going to be going into kind of that land acquisition bucket for the homeownership policy framework. One being more of the city level, Brooks Village, and the development ideas there. And then also more on a county level, the idea of land acquisition for unincorporated King County.
Great, thanks, Bambi. So a quick update on Skyway. Many of you have been walking with us on this journey of how the Skyway community wanting to get access to the Brooks Village site, and for homeownership development as well as community stewarded green space. And earlier this year, King County finalized the process that it would use. It offered an RFP process for the winner of which would get an exclusive negotiation agreement with the county for disposition of the land. It's not an actual transfer of the land as happened in White Center, but it will be a negotiation process. So after that, there were some intersecting conversations about critical areas and changes to the comp plan that would modify setbacks on wetlands areas. The Brooks Village property has extensive wetlands. The stormwater system there needs to be upgraded. The wetlands need to be restored and given some stewardship. The proposed critical areas changes could have killed the Brooks Village project because the wetland setbacks were so aggressive. I'm happy to say that community engaged with the King County. A fairly extensive coalition of folks met with Skyway Coalition and the Community Land Conservancy and Homestead to discuss the threat to Brooks Village of the proposed changes. It's a cautionary tale for all of us in terms of making sure we're paying attention to these comp plans, because the environmental pieces like the wetlands regulations go up through the process without being harmonized with the housing pieces. So it's incumbent upon us to be paying attention to both and calling to the county's attention those places where those regulations are in conflict or tension with our affordable housing goals. So the good news is that this group of folks from DNRP, DCHS, John Taylor, who's the Skyway representative to King County, all met with us, said we want to work together. They also acknowledged that the process that they had gone through with the critical areas report was not best practice, I guess, for involving communities of color in decisions that would represent them, that would potentially impact them. So we have some going forward steps to possibly treat Skyway, the Brooks Village project, as a demonstration project where we can work together to harmonize these the environmental goals for the county as well as the affordable housing goals. That it's a perfect site to do that. So we're excited about that, and we look forward to taking the next steps. The obvious next step for us is the completion of the RFP process and the extension of the exclusive negotiation agreement to Skyway and Homestead for collective development. There's no legislative asks specifically with that, but as we get further into these conversations around actual disposition of the land and also the harmonizing of the wetlands regulations with affordable housing goals, we may need this group to stand with the community of Skyway in advocating for what Skyway's vision is for Brooks Village, and providing that weight to what the coalition has requested and what they have in mind for homeownership development there. So there's a piece of an update on that. And I'm not looking at chat, so if there are questions or comments, I'll get back to that. the other piece is that there's been a conversation about how to influence the disposition of other properties that King County may have. And I believe that starts with, we are not sure what is there that's appropriate for home ownership development in particular. Homestead is going to be hiring a new person for our housing development team that is whose expertise, or a lot of whose job will be assessing feasibility of sites. So I've offered to lend our support to do some inventorying of possible surplus properties within King County's portfolio, particularly with emphasis on South King County, since that's a resource constrained place, but also is in the footprint of our BHI goals. We want to have 1,500 net new Black homeowners over the next, I guess now we've only got 4 years left, Bambi. And the South King County footprint is a priority geographic footprint for that work. So I've offered to lead up and have Homestead be part of identifying the properties that might be conducive to homeownership, and helping this group then shape a legislative or advocacy request that might go forward. It's obviously not a state legislature issue, it's more of a regional issue. So stay tuned for that. And if anybody has requests or feedback for us, just let me know.
Thank you so much for that, Kathleen, and for exemplifying that, leaning in on two really important changes and two really important processes. In the chat, there weren't any questions, just kudos. So nothing to address there. But yes, we'll be continuing to follow up on the Brooks Village process, and then really excited to see some resources being put to the question of what could be out there that can be something that could become a homeownership space. And so thank you so much for that. All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward now with Jesse Simpson of HDC. We're going to hear about acquiring land near transit for affordable housing.
Yeah, back to me. Thanks for having me. I'm gonna do a quick presentation here, walking through the general concepts around land acquisition and an update on where our efforts stand, given some of you may be familiar with and remembering our housing benefit district push for the last few years, and wanted to keep you all apprised on where our land banking goals are. So just setting the stage, the Puget Sound area has seen a huge expansion in fixed rail and bus rapid transit, with new light rail extensions going out. Fortunately, a lot of these dates are slipping a bit, but it's still coming up with extensions of Link Light Rail up to Everett, Ballard, out to West Seattle, and to with the East Link opening shortly, and then down south to Tacoma. What we see in general in terms of transit is that to the extent that it is perceived as an amenity, the value of that transit is in a real estate market economy priced into the land with no direct public capture of that benefit, which creates some both gentrification and displacement pressures. In terms of seeing our both housing and climate goals, we see a huge need for more housing of all types near transit, especially more affordable housing. The Puget Sound Regional Council has said we're going to need, I think their projections are nearly 1 million new homes near transit. And currently a lot of the efforts to actually, do equitable transit-oriented development, to do affordable housing, including rental and homeownership around that transit, is pretty piecemeal. Like, there's been a lot of great efforts to establish to get Sound Transit to think really proactively about how it's disposing of land that it acquires near transit stations. You get some great developments like Cedar Crossing at the Roosevelt Station. A lot of this is governed by this thing called the 80-80-80 rule, which is basically just saying that Sound Transit needs to make 80% of surplus property available to developers that have 80% of the homes affordable at less than 80% of the area median income. We get great ribbon cuttings, all that, 254 affordable homes here at Cedar Crossing. But what's happening outside that limited land that Sound Transit does happen to control? Well, I mean, Roosevelt Station's a good example. Like, you've got, since 2006, it's one of the more successful TOD areas across Seattle and the region, and you've seen more than 2,500 new homes, but all of the affordable ones are just within that Sound Transit net. And so we see a real need to think about the potential for land acquisition, land banking in the entire station area watershed, that entire half-mile, give or take, range around the major fixed rail transit. And I see this as a very important complement to TOD bills and just to zoning efforts on its own. And where you don't see market rate redevelopment, you just see the transit itself is not realizing its potential, and you're just driving up the cost of existing housing. And the affordable housing developers can do some limited piecemeal land acquisition. We can have public agencies look at higher and better uses of limited parcels that they do happen to own in these areas, but all of the efforts are pretty piecemeal. And so we see a real potential to scale up land banking around transit to meet these goals, to simultaneously mitigate reverse displacement pressures by acquiring underutilized land within the whole watershed around transit, and to use that as a basis for the kinds of community-led equitable development initiatives that I think are really key to seeing the transit realize the potential in terms of its mobility for low-income people getting around the region. We know that land cost is a huge barrier for affordable housing developers of all types, and so see that the prioritizing the acquisition of land can really build out a pipeline. Example here is at a Bellows Square, where Seattle Housing Authority had a parcel of land. There's a community collaboration plan, great development, community serving commercial space and plaza that can serve as a gathering, over 200 affordable homes at a range from 60 to 120% MI. Took a lot of work to coordinate and consistent community advocacy, and it only succeeded because it was, because the parcel was already owned by SHA. And so I think to me, it's showing the importance of that early public land ownership. Land banking's been used across the country. It's most frequently been thought about in the context of a declining or even kind of like a Rust Belt style market, where there's a bunch of vacant land in neighborhoods that neighbors want to put to better use over the long term. But there's been a few different efforts across the country recently to scale up land banking and support equitable development and complete communities in fast growing areas, especially around transit. So I think in addition to rental opportunities, we want to make sure that any kind of land banking efforts are supporting homeownership, that they're inclusive of the entire spectrum of affordable housing continuum, doing the ownership housing types, kind of an all of the above approach. So that's a general overview on land banking itself. Hope I've sold you a little bit on how important it is in terms of acquiring land for the outcomes that we all want to see in terms of equitable TOD. So little overview on past efforts, current status. We've had the bill framed around housing benefit districts heard 4 years in a row. There was some growing conceptual support and clearly recognition of the critical importance of land banking, but we really ran into the brick wall of the prioritization within a limited budget. There was some lingering skepticism about the particular mechanism of HBDs and not quite enough buy-in around like a big push in favor of this. What the legislature did do, which is it's a kind of dovetail with these land acquisition, land banking initiatives, was put 40 million extra into the Washington State Housing Finance Commission's land acquisition program. These are revolving funds that housing developers can apply to basically get a short-term loan to secure land, and it doesn't enter the full capital stack of the development. And so then after the land is secured and final financing is done, the funds return to the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. But it's led first and foremost by nonprofits who are looking for identifying particular parcels. And so I think there is a concept that was within the housing benefit districts bill, which I think we want to be pulling forward in future, in future engagements, is a way of integrating these land banking efforts into a planning apparatus to really think about, what does a community around a transit station need beyond just like density? What are the community serving needs? Is there a grocery store need, particular community amenities that are important to people there? And how can you acquire land and then ensure that that's included in the development? I view 2024 as we're not running a bill around, re-engaged HBDs this year, recognizing that basically 4 years of failure in a row is too much, and we need to be resetting the effort. How we floated it we have been in conversation with Steve Walker from Wishvik. He's very interested in the concept and sees a lot of potential in it. So we see this year as a year of really deep stakeholder engagement, including to this group. I think a lot of those efforts will get in full swing come spring, like right after the legislative session ends, and maybe hopefully the Seattle Comprehensive Plan update stuff is over, or like the DIS comment period is. But really focused engagement, bringing in voices to the table who were, maybe engaged a bit by sound communities and housing benefit districts, but weren't at the table from the beginning, and pulling in, identifying a legislative strategy and some policy parameters. So any questions? I see some Okay, Kathleen has a note about homeowners in West Seattle. Would like to talk about, land banking HPDs. So it's definitely interesting to me. Kathleen, Bambi told me a bit about the, give me a little preview on this. I don't want to delve us too far into the weeds of one particular site or like area.
Well, I think I'll just step in here just in the interest of time because we do have another presenter waiting.
Okay.
So, we did all advocate for housing benefits district in 2023. And of course that, didn't land up being successfully passed, but it brought the idea out in the open. And so Jesse is inviting us to, again, be a part of that stakeholder engagement. And so, sounds like we're thinking about the spring, but since we talk about our homeownership policy framework for the entirety of the 2024 year, we want to make sure that it's in the framework and we want to keep you informed. And then I think that maybe Jesse can connect with Kathleen offline. Sounds like a really interesting idea of what might be happening in West Seattle. I love the idea of property owners saying, I'd like to be a part of some type of change here. And that's amazing to hear. So super excited to see that happening. So I have Jesse's email in the chat here, and you can reach out to him. This will be something happening for the spring, but it is really important that we have voices in the room, make sure that we're thinking about this in a very equitable way. Sometimes when people were thinking about land banking in the past, they get lost in kind of the calculations, but the real important part to remember is what are we doing with all of the land that is happening around transit, not with just the site, but also around it? How are we creating sustainable and equitable communities? And what are the mechanisms we can explore for that? So thank you so much for presenting, Jesse, and people can reach out to Jesse. I will also include any announcements in our homeownership policy digest. I am going to go ahead and move forward now. We have Clara Monahan and Lily De Leon. They are here to speak to us from the office of King County Council Member Cole Wells about a King County resolution concerning reparative actions, something that is a bit of a sister concept to our Covenant Homeownership Act bill that we were all state level behind. So Clara or Lily, pass it over to you.
Yeah, so quick introductions, and then I have a quick presentation, but I know we're running a little behind, so we'll keep it quick. My name is Clara. I'm the policy director for Councilmember Cole Wells.
Yeah, and I'm Lily. I'm the communications and community outreach manager for Councilmember Cole Wells.
And all right, I am going to share my screen. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. What is that? Of course, I'm like, where do I view?
Slideshow. It's not intuitive, but it's under slideshow.
There we go. Thank you. So anyways, yes, redlining in the King County Council. So just quick overview. We are here because last week Councilmember Cole Wells introduced some new legislation that will be up for review before the end of the year. So a little bit about where it came from. Back in 2020, she sponsored a proviso, so basically restricted money from the wastewater treatment division, asking for a report on redlining in King County, the history of redlining, and exploring something called a capacity charge. Not sure people's level of familiarity with capacity charges, but the capacity charge is a charge that began in 1990 and operates under the same philosophy of growth pays for growth. And so new connections to the sewer system are levied a one-time fee based on the size of the development that's paid over the first 15 years that a development is present in the county. And so for, buildings that were built before 1990, they never had to pay a capacity charge. So she used that as a nexus to request this report on redlining. And the report was limited in its analysis to the capacity charge, but was intentionally really broad in the finding, like the information that it was collecting and compiling. So the report is a couple hundred pages long, but a very quick overview. Some of the key findings were really, it was really the economic analysis that since 1950, BIPOC households in King County have lost between 12 billion and 34 billion due to racially restrictive housing policies and redlining. That was an estimate that was created by several economists from different agencies and universities across the country. And that for Black households in King County in particular, the estimate cumulative loss of intergenerational wealth was between 5.4 billion and 15.8 billion, depending on whether the wealth was invested in income generating ways or not. As you all know, BIPOC homeownership rates between 1940 and 2019 have consistently been below white homeownership rates. And so this, the report itself has so much more information about, kind of the history and the different levels of government that were involved with the interplay of these different kind of forces that are involved with redlining. But their analysis was that the capacity charge was not an appropriate vehicle for facilitating reparations around redlining. There's a couple of reasons why. Largely it was federal and state law that restricts the ability of wastewater systems to charge differential rates. The other consideration that the analysts offered was that the scope of a capacity charge is really, really small in comparison to those types of numbers and the wealth that was documented and lost. So, however, the analysis, because it was through that proviso, was really limited to that capacity charge. So this current proposal really aims to build on that report, and it asks for more work to be done on this issue. So this is a motion requesting that the executive would provide recommendations that should include consultation with subject matter experts, including some of the academics and consultants that were part of, compiling that first report, as well as community groups. And that the report should include an analysis of reparative actions that other local jurisdictions have considered, such as direct cash payments, housing assistance, education assistance, land returns, startup capital. It also asks, so it is likely that you've heard some of our, just the conversations lately about how with the state's limits on ways that counties can levy progressive revenue, we're facing a significant, likely a significant shortfall in the next couple of years, and a bit of a budget crisis. And so Councilmember Colwells was interested in acknowledging that there will likely be cuts in the county budget over the next several years unless something changes, and requests that those cuts are not exacerbating the impacts that have already been documented, built upon over and over and over again. And then finally, that these reparative actions also are consulted or considered for our advocacy. So based on, what the report finds about opportunities for the county to take steps in this, what also are efforts that we could support at the state and federal level. Now, a quick note about motions in King County. It's kind of like a resolution for the city of Seattle. So it is non-binding. It is not a law. It is more of a request. So we've been working with the executive on this. They've been really receptive so far. And this would call for a report to be due on June 1st, 2024. So just giving some more information is really, we're trying to gather some more information is really what this proposal is. And then I will pass it off to Lily to go over the timeline.
Yeah, so just a timeline here of where we have been and where we're going. So in 2019 is when that report was requested, and just requiring the capacity charge, exploring that within the confines of redlining in King County. And then in April of this year is when we actually received that report, but it wasn't presented to the council until July of this year. And then that is when we heard that the capacity charge was not a viable means of the exemption program. So then yesterday, that's when we introduced this follow-up legislation building on the initial report to explore other avenues for reparations. And then now in later on in this month is when it'll be heard for the first time in the committee of the whole. And then hopefully now before the end of the year in early December, we're looking for it to be taken up by the full council.
And just one more quick note about timeline. So you may or may not know, but Councilmember Colwell's term is up at the end of the year and she is retiring. And so she's currently kind of the driver behind this. And so that's part of the interest in really moving on this. And yeah, so I think we're really interested in, feedback. There's several weeks until the hearing for further refinement. And it looks like we did get something in the chat. Yes, I can definitely provide a copy of the slideshow afterwards. So I will stop sharing, and it looks like, Cliff, you have a hand up.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. I look forward to this motion coming through on the 29th and being heard. But I did want to also just address something I was thinking about. And so with the county's funds for home ownership and whatnot, I was wondering where the county is on trying to address putting those funds effectively towards home ownership, because right now they're kind of limited at like 60% AMI, which just would squash a lot of affordable home ownership projects. So I'm wondering if whether Councilmember Colwell's or any of the other council members have anything moving on that.
So I can't speak for any of the other council members. I don't know. I know that we're not actively working on anything. I'm not sure. I know the VSHSL is going through right now and I'm not staffing that one. So I'm not as much of an expert on that, but I think that this would, and part of that is, right, what could the county do? Could the county create some sort of down payment assistance program, or what kinds of supports are there that could be the county's role to implement? And I think that's part of what we're hoping to get from this report. And if there are barriers to that, what are they? And how can that be navigated?
I was going to say, or a committed, fund for home ownership projects at 80 to 120% AMI. I think that's something I know Kathleen is engaged on that. I know I have and others on this call have. And I think even though a lot of the funds that come through the Fed come through from the federal government, put stuff at 80%, 60% AMI. It would be great if the county could figure out a way to either maybe match those funds and start a parallel thing at like a higher AMI level. So a lot of these projects that are aimed towards building home ownership opportunities in the Black community could actually pencil out, and that we could actually develop something more than just like rental housing.
Gotcha. Yes,
Kathleen,
that is a great suggestion.
I'm going to have you quickly step in here, Kathleen, but we do have one other person waiting to present. So we'll make it quick.
Quick comment for the presenters. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the research. Just to call your attention to that in our high cost housing market, down payment assistance is not sufficient to address the disparities in BIPOC homeownership. We must prioritize supply, increasing supply of income appropriately priced homeownership. And so that's why the financing and the funding for a new construction, new development of homeownership is key. And that doesn't come out of the operating budget, as I understand. Generally speaking, the biggest money comes from the TOD bond funds and that type of thing. And so, but that's just if any of the presenters are interested in understanding a little bit more about how down payment assistance versus capital investments work, I'm happy to talk with you offline about that so that you have that background. Thanks, though.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clara and Lily. If you wouldn't mind putting your emails into the chat so people can connect with you. Exciting to see this happening and where it may go. Hoping that you'll also find a champion that will be continuing on the council. So looking forward to future updates. I am going to go ahead and move forward because we do have just a few minutes to the end of the hour. We may run a few minutes over, and that's okay. If you need to head out, I will record this. But we do have Eliana Horn here today to speak about the King County Equitable Development Initiative. We all know the Seattle Equitable Development Initiative. We were making sure to advocate and follow that as it was moving. And now we're talking about the King County Equitable Development Initiative. And there is a call to action that is happening for November. So Aliana, I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to you. Oh, and I think I'm going to go ahead and there you go.
There you go. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me some time to talk about the King County Equitable Development Initiative. My name is Eliana Horn. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a policy analyst focused on community stewardship of land at Puget Sound Sage. We have a little presentation for y'all today. So I want to talk to you about our efforts to get an equitable development initiative started at Puget Sound State. At the county. As you all know, there is one that exists at Seattle, and we've been working for about 3 years to get one off the ground at the county. Puget Sound Sage has adopted a framework called Community Stewardship of Land that really guides our work on displacement, and our orientation basically includes that we see that the root cause of displacement is the commodification of housing amidst white supremacy, and that the solution here is community stewardship of land. And you can see some of the principles that we look to kind of determine where we put our energy and policy efforts on the right, and these include that community stewardship of land is for community not profit, collective ownership and self-determination, permanent community purpose, democratic community governance, community power, and ecological well-being. We have a website called communitystewardshipofland.org that expands on these principles if you want to learn more. And community stewardship, the definition of community stewardship of land is that it transforms land and housing from a commodity that creates individual and corporate wealth to a shared resource that generates community prosperity. So that's really kind of the goal that we are working toward. We're trying to get as much land off the market as possible, and into a community stewardship that really embodies these principles. I know that many of you are familiar with the Seattle Equitable Development Initiative. It was created, off the top of my head, somewhere around 2015, if I'm getting it correctly, and is a program that exists at the city that is both a major capacity building resource for BIPOC-led and other impacted community-led development projects, and provides a unique source of funding for these projects that addresses non-housing uses such as cultural space, commercial space, and really trying to cultivate cultural anchors in communities at high risk of displacement. And we know that displacement is a countywide problem. It's not just a Seattle problem. Folks who have been displaced from Seattle are, rooting in communities across King County at the same time that communities that have been across King County and are moving to communities across King County are at serious risk of displacement. And through county process for the King County Equitable Development Initiative, we have really, part of that has been to basically do some data analysis around displacement indicators across the county. And some of what we found is quite stark, including, actually I can pull them up, that, across King County, 50% of Black households are cost burdened, meaning they pay over 30% of their income in rent, I'm sure you all know, as compared to 29% of white households. And of that 50%, 24.9% are severely cost burdened, meaning they pay over 50% of their income in rent. And in White Center, Skyway, and Tequila, over 40% of households are cost burdened. There are some more statistics that will be coming out as part of a transmittal that's going before council in January. So to give a little background about our work to get Equitable Development Initiative started at the county level, in March of 2022, the council and executive, there was a motion in March of 22 that mandated that the council and executive establish an EDI program and implementation plan. And that was going to occur in 2 phases through a community planning work group. And we're basically at the end of that process. That planning work group has wrapped up their work. The transmittal is before the executive currently and will be transmitted to council in January. So why King County Equitable Development Initiative? This is a countywide initiative. So one thing that we are doing a little bit differently than how the initiative has occurred in Seattle is that we're really seeing this as something that we want to be countywide. So one of the learnings from the Seattle Local Development Initiative is that there was it's a bit siloed, like EDI exists in OPCD, and OH is a totally different department. And there was not a lot of collaboration. In moments, there's been more collaboration, but overall, not a lot of collaboration on getting equitable development projects through, and kind of all the different funding needs addressed across programs. And so we're trying a little bit of a different model at King County that is both about creating a separate funding source, as well as basically aligning programs and departments under a mandate of equitable development, so that equitable development projects, sorry, it's a mouthful, equitable development projects can get all of their needs met. So we've had some members of our coalition receive funding for acquisition, but then not get capacity building funding from another source. And I think we all know that is going to make projects less likely to be successful, less likely to embody the values that we want to see in inequitable development and make it a lot harder and resource intensive for smaller BIPOC-led organizations. And so, yeah, while it's modeled off of Seattle EDI, we're also trying to learn lessons from the Seattle EDI. And we're trying to expand funding opportunities outside of Seattle for community-led development, increase total resources, create a flexible funding for both capacity building and pre-development, as well as for non-housing uses, and make sure that this is community-led, controlled, and designed work. And this is a little infographic on the side that kind of talks about all of the different aspects of what a King County EDI does, which includes alignment across King County programs, land acquisition, preservation, and construction of multi-use facilities, capacity building, technical assistance, and community engagement, and King County staff that are community and project centered. So staff are leading, are coming from a community and project vision first, rather than kind of funding first model. So the transmittal is coming before council in January, but we want to get ahead of the game because we don't want to wait another year to get this program off the ground. And we've identified that there is about $1.5 to $3 million of short-term lodging revenue that has currently not been appropriated for any specific uses at the county level, and would be a great source of funding to get King County Equitable Development Initiative off the ground in 2024. We're also at the same time advocating currently before council. There is an ordinance that's going to go both before council and the regional policy committee to establish a cultural access tax, which would be a 0.01% increase in sales tax to fund cultural and arts programming across the county. We see that tax as a whole is regressive and does not adequately incorporate equity across the tax, which is about $100 million, which will generate about $100 million in revenue a year. Building for Equity is a program that For Culture has run for quite some time that has done a great job of increasing capacity and providing for some non-housing uses for projects across King County that are rooted in equitable development principles and community stewardship of land. And so we're also advocating that if this tax were to pass as a regressive tax, that we want to see a double the current investment that the tax has in that program, which is called Building for Equity. And that concludes our presentation, and we can open up for questions.
Thank you so much for being here today, Aliana. So what I am going to do, since we are over time at this moment, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I connect with Aliana offline. And then in the digest this Friday, the concrete actions that you can take around the idea of looking for the funding in 2024, not waiting until 2025, will be there. And we'll put it together in that same way we always do, where you can hit a button and you can submit your testimony, you can make a letter, we'll have some talking points. So we're very excited to King County, coming aware of that success of what happened in Seattle, looking to kind of replicate what is working in the Equitable Development Initiative. We saw so many of the organizations and stakeholders in our group who were able to receive funding from the Equitable Development Initiative in Seattle. And the idea of it being at King County and the process that has been happening is really exciting. But we want to make sure it's funded. And so this is that moment in which the ask will be to make sure that you all can use your voice to ensure that the funding is happening, to get it going as soon as possible, because it was needed beyond yesterday. So thank you so much to Aliana for being here, and thank you all for being here. I will be sending out information around our completed homeownership policy framework, a couple of sentences to explain every item. We have a really robust and full framework, and I look forward to our advocacy and to seeing you all on December 13th when we have our summit, which will initiate our framework and our advocacy for 2024. We will also be bringing speakers back in the new year. So, Aliana could have a little bit more space and be able to speak to us more as we move into the new year. But thank you for hanging on the call here. I know we're over time, but so happy to be with you today and wishing you all the best.